At our 10th anniversary party, my husband stood up to toast our marriage, then announced he was leaving me for his dentist. The room fell silent as Dr. Rachel Stone stepped forward, flashing her perfect smile. That's when I stood up and said, "How unfortunate, Rachel. I own your practice, your building, and your entire medical license agreement. Consider this your 30-day notice." The color drained from both their faces as I calmly walked out, leaving behind a room full of gasps and my husband sobbing into his champagne. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lisa Harper, and 3 months ago I thought I had everything. A successful healthcare investment company that I'd built from the ground up, a beautiful home in Cherry Hills Village outside Denver, and what I believed was a solid 10-year marriage to Tom Harper. I should have known something was wrong when Tom started caring more about his dental hygiene than he had in our entire relationship together. It began innocently enough 6 months earlier, when Tom complained about tooth sensitivity during our usual Saturday morning coffee routine. We were sitting on our wraparound deck, overlooking the Colorado foothills, and he kept wincing every time he took a sip. I suggested he finally see a dentist, something he'd been putting off for nearly 2 years despite my gentle nagging. Tom had always been one of those people who avoided doctors and dentists like the plague, preferring to tough things out rather than admit he needed professional help. After some research, he settled on Dr. Rachel Stone, whose practice was located in the upscale Belcaro neighborhood. Her reviews were glowing, and she specialized in cosmetic and restorative dentistry. What I didn't know at the time was that Dr. Stone's practice operated under the umbrella of MedCore Denver, one of the largest healthcare facility management companies in the Colorado region. What I also didn't know was that I had acquired a controlling interest in MedCore Denver 18 months earlier through my investment firm Harper Healthcare Venture. My company specialized in purchasing struggling medical practices and healthcare facilities, then revitalizing them through improved management, updated technology, and strategic partnership. It was incredibly lucrative work that had allowed me to build a portfolio worth over $40 million by the age of 35. I took pride in saving practices that might otherwise have failed, providing continued employment for healthcare workers, and ensuring patients maintained access to quality care. Tom's first appointment with Dr. Stone went well. Or so he told me. He came home talking about how professional and knowledgeable she was, how modern her office looked, and how comfortable she'd made him feel during what he'd expected to be an unpleasant experience. I was genuinely happy that he'd found a dentist he liked, especially since getting him to that first appointment had taken months of gentle persuasion. But then came the follow-up appointment. Suddenly Tom needed extensive work, treatments that required multiple visits spread out over several months. A root canal here, some cosmetic bonding there, professional whitening treatments, and something called gum recontouring that I'd never heard of but apparently was essential for his oral health. Each appointment seemed to require longer and longer sessions, and Tom would come home looking refreshed and energized in a way that seemed disproportionate to having spent 2 hours in a dental chair. I began to notice changes in his behavior around the same time. Tom started paying more attention to his appearance, investing in expensive cologne, and updating his wardrobe with clothes that were more fitted and fashionable than his usual business casual style. He joined a gym and began working out religiously, something he'd never shown interest in during our entire marriage. When I commented on these positive changes, he attributed them to feeling better about his smile and wanting to take better care of himself overall. The dental appointments increased in frequency. What had started as monthly visits became bi-weekly, then weekly consultations for what Dr. Stone called preventive maintenance and optimization treatment. Tom explained that she was helping him achieve the perfect smile and that the investment in his oral health would pay dividends for years to come. He showed me before and after photos on his phone, and I had to admit that his teeth looked remarkably better. His smile was brighter, more confident, and more attractive than it had been in years. I started to feel suspicious when Tom began working late more frequently, often texting me that he had dinner meetings or networking events that would keep him out until well after my usual bedtime. Previously, Tom had been a creature of habit who preferred quiet evenings at home to social obligations. His newfound enthusiasm for professional networking seemed out of character, but I tried to be supportive of what appeared to be positive changes in his career ambition. The red flags became harder to ignore when I noticed Tom's phone habits changing. He'd always been casual about leaving his phone on the kitchen counter or coffee table, but suddenly it was glued to his side. He started taking calls in private, stepping out onto the deck or into his home office and closing the door. When I asked about the increased phone activity, he explained that he was working on some new business deals that required confidential discussion. I discovered the truth entirely by accident on a Tuesday evening in late February. Tom had left his phone charging in our bedroom while he showered, and it kept buzzing with notifications. Normally I would never have looked, but the frequency of the messages was disruptive, and I thought there might be some kind of emergency. When I glanced at the screen, I saw a series of text messages from someone listed in his contacts as Dr. Rachel Stone, DD. The preview text that appeared on his lock screen made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I've been thinking about our conversation all day. You make me feel things I haven't felt in years." This was followed by another message that said, "I know this is complicated, but I think we both know where this is heading." My hands trembled as I screenshot the message previews and forwarded them to my own phone before deleting the evidence from Tom's message history. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm and methodical. If Tom was having an affair with his dentist, I needed to gather more information before confronting him. My business background had taught me never to make major decisions based on incomplete information. Over the next few weeks, I began paying closer attention to Tom's schedule and behavior patterns. I started noting the dates and times of his dental appointments, cross-referencing them with his claimed business meetings and networking events. The correlation was unmistakable. Every late meeting corresponded with an evening when he could have easily stopped by Dr. Stone's office after hours. I also began investigating Dr. Rachel Stone herself. Her practice website showed a beautiful woman in her early 30s, with the kind of perfect smile you'd expect from a cosmetic dentist. She had graduated from the University of Colorado School of Dental Medicine and completed a residency in cosmetic and restorative dentistry at a prestigious program in California before returning to Denver to establish her practice. Her bio mentioned that she was passionate about helping patients achieve their perfect smiles and that she took a holistic approach to dental care that considered both aesthetic and functional outcomes. What struck me as I read her professional background was how accomplished and successful she appeared to be. Dr. Stone wasn't some desperate woman looking to break up a marriage. She was an educated professional with her own thriving practice. This realization made the betrayal sting even more because it suggested that Tom hadn't simply made a mistake or fallen victim to someone else's manipulation. He had actively chosen to pursue a relationship with someone who represented everything he found more appealing than our marriage. The final piece of evidence came when I decided to drive by Dr. Stone's office one evening when Tom claimed to be at a business dinner across town. It was nearly 8 o'clock, well past normal business hours, but I could see lights on in the office windows and Tom's distinctive black BMW parked in the otherwise empty lot. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching the building and wrestling with the decision of whether to confront them immediately or continue gathering information. I chose patience, a decision that would prove crucial to what happened later. Instead of confronting Tom that evening, I began planning our 10th anniversary party with the same meticulous attention to detail that I brought to my business dealing. If Tom wanted to humiliate me by continuing his affair, I would ensure that any public revelation of his betrayal would happen on my terms, not his. Our anniversary fell on a Saturday in late April, and I had planned what I thought would be a celebration of our decade together. I booked the private dining room at the Brown Palace Hotel in downtown Denver, a venue that held special significance for us since Tom had proposed there 5 years into our relationship. I invited 40 of our closest friends and family members, including Tom's parents who had flown in from Phoenix, my sister and her husband from Seattle, and several couples we'd grown close to over the year. I spent weeks planning every detail of the evening, from the menu selection to the floral arrangements to the playlist of songs that represented different phases of our relationship. I even had a photo montage created, showing highlights from our 10 years together, set to music that would play during dinner. In retrospect, the effort I put into planning our anniversary party while knowing about Tom's affair seems masochistic, but at the time it felt like maintaining some sense of control over a situation that had spiraled beyond my influence. The day of our anniversary party, I woke up early and spent the morning at my favorite spa getting a massage, facial, and having my hair and makeup done professional. I wanted to look absolutely stunning, not out of any desire to win Tom back, but because I knew that confidence and self-assurance would be essential for whatever was about to unfold. I chose a midnight blue cocktail dress that I knew looked exceptional on me, and paired it with diamond earrings that had been my grandmother's. Tom seemed nervous throughout the day, checking his phone frequently and making several private calls that he claimed were work-related. He complimented my appearance when I emerged from our bedroom ready for the party, but there was something hollow in his voice that confirmed my suspicions about what was coming. We drove to the Brown Palace in relative silence, both lost in our own thoughts about the evening ahead. The party began beautifully. Our friends and family filled the elegant, private dining room, sharing stories and laughter over cocktails and appetizers. Tom played the role of devoted husband perfectly, keeping his arm around my waist and smiling warmly as people offered toasts and congratulations on reaching our 10-year milestone. I watched him perform this charade with a mixture of admiration and disgust, impressed by his acting ability while simultaneously repulsed by his dishonesty. Dinner was served promptly at 7:30, and the conversation flowed easily among our guests. People shared memories of our wedding, offered marriage advice, and speculated about what the next decade might bring for us. I participated in these conversations with genuine warmth toward our friends, while feeling increasingly detached from the woman they believed me to be. The Lisa Harper they knew was happily married and confident in her relationship. The real Lisa Harper was planning something that would shatter that illusion forever. As we finished the main course and prepared for dessert, Tom stood up and tapped his champagne glass to get everyone's attention. This was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I knew from his nervous energy throughout the day that something significant was coming, and I suspected it would be the public announcement of his intention to leave our marriage. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone with Lisa and me, Tom began, his voice carrying clearly across the room. 10 years ago, I thought I knew what love was. I thought I understood what it meant to build a life with someone, and to commit to growing together through all of life's challenges and changes. The room was completely silent, hanging on his every word. I could see our friends and family members smiling expectantly, assuming they were about to hear a heartfelt tribute to our marriage and perhaps an announcement about future plans or renewed commitment. But over the past few months, I've come to realize that real love, authentic love, sometimes means having the courage to admit when something isn't working, and to make difficult decisions that honor the truth of who we've become as individuals. The smiles around the room began to falter as people started to sense that this speech was heading in an unexpected direction. I felt my heart pounding, but I maintained my composure and kept my expression neutral and attentive. Lisa, you are an incredible woman and you deserve someone who can love you with the wholeness and authenticity that you bring to everything you do. I've realized that I can't be that person for you anymore, and it wouldn't be fair to either of us to pretend otherwise. The room was now completely silent except for the soft clinking of silverware as someone nervously set down their fork. I could feel everyone's eyes moving between Tom and me, trying to process what they were hearing. I've fallen in love with someone else, someone who has shown me what it feels like to be truly understood and appreciated for who I am. Her name is Dr. Rachel Stone, and she's here tonight because I wanted you all to meet the woman who has changed my life. That's when she stepped forward from where she had been standing near the entrance to our private dining room. Dr. Rachel Stone was even more beautiful in person than she had appeared in her professional photos, with auburn hair, striking green eyes, and a confident smile that suggested she was completely comfortable with the explosive revelation that had just occurred. She was wearing an elegant black dress that looked expensive and sophisticated, and she moved with the poise of someone who was accustomed to being the center of attention. The room erupted in shocked whispers and uncomfortable shifting in chairs as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. I watched as my sister's face contorted with disbelief and anger, while Tom's mother covered her mouth with her hands in horror. The carefully planned celebration had transformed into a public spectacle of betrayal and humiliation, exactly as Tom and Rachel had intended, but they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed I would react like a typical scorned wife, dissolving into tears or creating an emotional scene that would make me appear unstable and vindictive. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress, and smiled with the same professional composure I used when closing multi-million-dollar business deals. "How interesting," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "Tom, I appreciate your honesty, though I wish you had extended me the courtesy of a private conversation before making such a public announcement. However, since we're sharing surprising news tonight, I have something equally unexpected to share." I turned to face Dr. Rachel Stone directly, noting how her confident smile had begun to waver as she sensed that something was shifting in the room's dynamics. Tom looked confused, clearly not understanding why I wasn't reacting with the emotional breakdown he had anticipated. "Dr. Stone, I'm curious. Are you familiar with your practice's management structure? Specifically, do you know who owns the building where your office is located, who holds your equipment leases, and who ultimately controls your licensing agreements through the healthcare network you operate under?" Rachel's perfect smile faltered completely as the color began to drain from her face. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to understand where this conversation was heading. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she said, though her voice lacked the confidence she had displayed moments earlier. "I'm not implying anything, Rachel. I'm stating facts. You operate under MedCore Denver's healthcare management umbrella. MedCore Denver is a subsidiary of Colorado Healthcare Partners, and Colorado Healthcare Partners is owned entirely by Harper Healthcare Ventures, my company." The silence in the room was now absolute. Even the hotel staff who had been quietly clearing dishes from nearby tables had stopped their work to listen to this extraordinary exchange. "What this means, Rachel, is that I own your practice. I own the building you lease. I own the equipment you use to perform procedures. I own the licensing agreements that allow you to operate as part of our network. And as of tomorrow morning, I'll be exercising my rights as the ultimate owner of your practice to terminate all of these agreements effective immediately." Tom's face had gone completely white as he began to understand the implications of what I was saying. He had known about my healthcare investment business, of course, but he had never paid close attention to the specific details of my portfolio. Like many men of his generation, he had been content to enjoy the financial benefits of my success without fully understanding how that success was achieved. "You can't do that," Rachel said, though her voice was shaking now. "I have patients, staff members, financial obligations. Actually, I can do exactly that. When you signed your agreements with MedCore Denver, you agreed to operate according to our professional standards and ethics guidelines. Those guidelines include maintaining appropriate boundaries with patients and their family. I'm sure you can understand how your current relationship with my husband represents a significant conflict of interest that reflects poorly on our entire network." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope that I had prepared earlier that afternoon. Inside were copies of all the relevant contracts and agreements that governed Rachel's practice, along with a formal notice of termination that I had drafted with the help of my corporate attorney. "This envelope contains your 30-day notice of termination, along with detailed information about the wind-down process for your practice. You'll find contact information for our transition team, who will work with you to ensure your patients are transferred to other providers within our network. Your staff will be offered positions at other locations, and will handle the equipment removal and facility cleanup." The devastating efficiency of my response seemed to stun everyone in the room. This wasn't an emotional reaction born of hurt feelings or desire for revenge. This was a calculated business decision delivered with the same professional competence that had made me successful in the healthcare investment industry. Tom finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Lisa, you can't destroy someone's career because you're angry about our marriage." "I'm not destroying anyone's career, Tom. I'm enforcing professional standards that protect our network's reputation, and maintain appropriate boundaries between providers and patients' families. Dr. Stone is welcome to establish a new practice outside of our network, assuming she can secure independent financing, licensing, and facility agreements. The practical implications of what I was saying hit Rachel like a physical blow. Starting a new dental practice required enormous upfront capital, months of regulatory approval processes, and the challenge of building a new patient base from scratch. Everything she had worked for over the past 5 years would be gone, and rebuilding would take years and potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars she didn't have. "This is vindictive and petty," she said, though her voice was shaking with barely controlled panic. "This is business," I replied calmly. "When you chose to become involved with a patient's spouse, you violated the professional boundaries that our network requires. The fact that this patient happens to be my husband is irrelevant from a policy standpoint. We would take the same action regardless of my personal relationship to the situation." I turned to address the room, where our friends and family members were watching this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. Many of them had never seen me in full business mode, and I could tell they were surprised by the composed, authoritative way I was handling what should have been the most emotionally devastating moment of my personal life. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate what I thought was our 10th anniversary. As you can see, the celebration has taken an unexpected turn, but I hope you'll stay for dessert and continue to enjoy each other's company. Tom, I assume you'll be leaving with Dr. Stone, so please take your personal belongings from the house tomorrow while I'm at work. I'll have our attorneys contact you about the divorce proceeding." With that, I picked up my champagne glass, raised it in a mock toast, and said, "Here's to new beginnings and the importance of reading the fine print in your professional contract." I drained the glass, set it down on the table, and walked toward the exit with the same measured confidence I had maintained throughout the entire confrontation. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of conversation as our guests began processing what they had just witnessed, but I didn't look back. The hotel valet brought my car around, and I drove home through the quiet Denver streets, feeling strangely calm and clear-headed. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a profound sense of relief that the charade was finally over. For months I had been living with the knowledge of Tom's betrayal while pretending everything was normal. Now the truth was out, and I could begin moving forward with my life. When I arrived home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on our deck, overlooking the foothills, reflecting on everything that had just transpired. The house felt different already, less like a home and more like a temporary space that would soon need to be reconfigured for a single occupant. I began mentally cataloging which furniture and belongings I would want to keep and which had too many memories attached to be worth preserving. My phone began buzzing with calls and text messages from friends and family members who had witnessed the evening's events, but I wasn't ready to discuss what had happened. Instead, I turned off the phone and spent the evening in peaceful solitude, planning the practical steps I would need to take in the coming days and weeks. The next morning, I woke early and drove to my office in the Denver Tech Center, a gleaming glass building that housed Harper Healthcare Ventures and several other investment firms. My assistant, Karen, was already at her desk when I arrived, having seen the news alerts about the previous evening's events that had somehow made their way into the local business gossip networks. "Good morning, Lisa. I've already received several calls from reporters asking for comments about the situation with Dr. Stone's practice. How would you like me to handle media inquiries?" I appreciated Karen's professionalism and discretion. She had been with my company for 3 years and understood the importance of maintaining confidentiality around sensitive business matters. "Please refer all media inquiries to our corporate communications firm. They'll handle any public statements we need to make. For now, I want to focus on ensuring that Dr. Stone's patients are properly transitioned to other providers and that her staff members are offered positions within our network. I've already begun reaching out to our other dental practices to assess their capacity for new patients. Dr. Martinez at the Cherry Creek location says he can accommodate up to 50 additional patients, and Dr. Kim in Highlands Ranch has room for 30 more. This was exactly the kind of professional, efficient response I had come to expect from my team. While my personal life was imploding, my business operations continued to function smoothly because I had hired competent people and established clear systems and procedures. "Excellent," Please also schedule a meeting with our legal team for this afternoon. I want to review all of our network agreements to ensure we're handling Dr. Stone's termination in full compliance with our contracts and industry regulations. The morning flew by as I immersed myself in the familiar routine of business operation. There was something therapeutic about focusing on concrete problems that could be solved through careful analysis and strategic decision-making. The emotional chaos of the previous evening seemed to belong to a different world entirely. Around noon, Karen knocked on my office door to let me know that Tom was in the lobby asking to see me. I wasn't surprised that he had come to my office rather than calling first. Tom had always been someone who preferred face-to-face conversations for important discussions, and he probably assumed that I would be more willing to listen to him in a professional setting where I was comfortable and confident. Please show him to conference room B and let him know I'll be with him in a few minutes, I told Karen. I wanted to finish reviewing some contracts before dealing with whatever Tom had come to say. When I entered the conference room 10 minutes later, Tom was sitting at the large mahogany table looking rumpled and exhausted. He had clearly not slept well, and his usually impeccable appearance showed signs of stress and anxiety. For a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy for him, remembering the man I had fallen in love with years earlier. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, as I took a seat across from him. "I know you have every right to refuse to speak with me after what happened last night. You're correct that I have no obligation to speak with you, but I'm willing to listen to what you came to say. I assume this is about the divorce proceedings, or the situation with Dr. Stone's practice." Tom ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of extreme stress. "Lisa, I know I handled everything terribly last night. The way I announced our separation was cruel and thoughtless, and I understand why you're angry, but destroying Rachel's career isn't going to solve anything or make either of us feel better about this situation." I studied his face carefully, looking for signs of genuine remorse or understanding of the deeper issues involved. What I saw instead was the same self-centered perspective that had characterized our marriage for years. Tom was concerned about the consequences of my actions but showed no real comprehension of how his behavior had created this situation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I didn't terminate Dr. Stone's network agreements because I'm angry about our marriage ending. I terminated them because she violated professional standards that are clearly outlined in our contracts. The fact that her inappropriate relationship happened to be with my husband is unfortunate, but it's not the basis for my business decision. Come on, Lisa. You can't honestly expect me to believe that this is purely a business matter. You're using your position to punish Rachel for something that's really between you and me. His inability to understand the ethical dimensions of the situation frustrated me more than his infidelity had. Tom had always been somewhat obtuse about professional boundaries and conflicts of interest, but I had hoped that facing the consequences of those blind spots might force him to develop better judgment. Let me explain something to you about the healthcare industry, Tom. Trust is the foundation of every provider-patient relationship. When patients come to see Dr. Stone, they're putting their health and well-being in her hands. They have a right to expect that she will maintain appropriate professional boundaries and prioritize their care over her personal interests. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline while I continued my explanation. When Dr. Stone began a romantic relationship with you, she demonstrated that she's willing to violate those boundaries for personal gain. What happens the next time she develops feelings for a patient or a patient's family member? How can we trust her to maintain professional standards when she's already proven that her personal desires take precedence over ethical guidelines? Tom was quiet for several minutes, perhaps finally beginning to understand the broader implications of his affair. When he spoke again, his voice was softer and less confrontational. "I never thought about it that way. But Rachel isn't a bad person, Lisa. She's a dedicated professional who made a mistake. Doesn't she deserve a chance to learn from this and do better?" "She absolutely deserves that chance, Tom. She can pursue it at a practice that isn't part of our network. Our responsibility is to protect our patients and maintain the integrity of our provider network. Dr. Stone's actions have compromised both of those priorities." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes,
but it became clear that Tom and I had fundamentally different perspectives on accountability and professional responsibility. He saw Rachel's termination as an overreaction to a personal slight, while I viewed it as a necessary response to a serious breach of professional ethics. As our meeting concluded, Tom made one final attempt to change my mind. "Lisa, I'm asking you to reconsider this decision not because of what it means for Rachel and me, but because of what it says about who you want to be as a person. Do you really want to be someone who destroys other people's lives when they disappoint you?" His question stung because it touched on doubts I had been wrestling with since the previous evening. Was I being vindictive and cruel, or was I simply holding people accountable for their choices? Was there a meaningful difference between justice and revenge, or was I fooling myself about my own motivations? "Tom, I've built my career on making difficult decisions that protect the long-term interests of my business and the people it serves. Sometimes those decisions have negative consequences for individuals who make poor choices. That's not cruelty, that's leadership." After Tom left my office, I spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings with my legal team, reviewing the termination procedures and ensuring that we were handling everything properly. The lawyers confirmed that we had clear grounds for terminating Dr. Stone's agreements and that we were following all required notification and transition procedures. That evening, I received a call from my sister Jennifer, who had flown back to Seattle that morning, but wanted to check on how I was handling everything. "Lisa, I have to say, watching you last night was like seeing a completely different side of you. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that with such composure and strategic thinking. I'm not sure I could have been that calm if David had pulled something like that at our anniversary party." Jennifer's words were comforting because they confirmed that my response had appeared measured and appropriate to outside observers. I had worried that I might have seemed cold or calculating, but Jennifer's perspective suggested that I had struck the right balance between professional competence and personal dignity. "I think the business training kicked in," I told her. "When you're used to dealing with complex problems under pressure, it becomes easier to stay focused on solutions rather than getting overwhelmed by emotions." "Well, whatever the reason, I was proud of how you handled yourself. And frankly, I think Tom and his dentist got exactly what they deserved. Actions have consequences, and they're both learning that the hard way." Over the following days, word of the anniversary party confrontation spread throughout Denver's business and social circle. The story had everything that gossip networks loved: a successful businesswoman, a cheating husband, a beautiful other woman, and a dramatic public confrontation with serious financial consequence. Most of the feedback I received was supportive, with friends and colleagues expressing admiration for how I had handled the situation. Several other women reached out to share their own stories of infidelity and betrayal, thanking me for demonstrating that it was possible to respond to such situations with strength and dignity rather than falling apart. However, there were also critics who felt that my response had been disproportionate and vindictive. A few online commentators suggested that I had abused my business position to exact personal revenge, and there were questions about whether my actions set a dangerous precedent for mixing personal grievances with professional decisions. I found myself thinking carefully about these criticisms because they raised legitimate questions about the boundaries between personal and professional life. Had I crossed a line by using my business position to address a personal betrayal? Was there a meaningful difference between holding someone accountable for professional misconduct and seeking revenge for personal wrongs? The more I reflected on these questions, the more convinced I became that my response had been appropriate and necessary. Dr. Stone's relationship with Tom wasn't just a personal matter. It was a violation of professional ethics that compromised the integrity of our healthcare network and potentially put other patients at risk. 3 weeks after the anniversary party, I received a letter from Stone's attorney threatening legal action for wrongful termination and intentional interference with business relationships. The letter claimed that my actions were motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate business concerns, and that Stone had suffered significant financial damages as a result of my vindictive decision. I forwarded the letter to my legal team, who reviewed it carefully and concluded that Dr. Stone had no viable claims against our company. Our termination procedures had been followed correctly, the grounds for termination were clearly documented, and our network agreements gave us broad discretion to make decisions about provider relationships. This is a nuisance suit designed to pressure you into reversing your decision or offering a financial settlement, my attorney explained during our meeting. Dr. Stone's lawyer knows they don't have a strong case, but they're hoping you'll want to avoid the time and expense of litigation. I instructed my legal team to respond aggressively to the threatened lawsuit, making it clear that we would not be intimidated into reversing a decision that had been made on legitimate business grounds. If Dr. Stone wanted to pursue litigation, we were prepared to defend our actions vigorously and seek attorney's fees and sanctions if her claims proved to be frivolous. The threatened lawsuit never materialized. 3 days after my attorneys sent their response, Dr. Stone's lawyer called to say that his client had decided not to pursue legal action and would focus instead on rebuilding her practice at a new location. This outcome reinforced my confidence that I had made the right decision. If Dr. Stone had truly believed that she had been wrongfully terminated, she would have pursued her legal claims rather than backing down when faced with a vigorous defense. Her decision to withdraw suggested that she understood, at some level, that her relationship with Tom had indeed violated professional boundaries that justified her termination from our network. A month after the anniversary party, Tom moved out of our house and into an apartment near Stone's new practice location. The divorce proceedings moved forward efficiently, with minimal disagreement about asset division or support obligation. Tom seemed eager to finalize everything quickly, perhaps hoping that a clean break would allow him and Rachel to move forward without the shadow of the network termination hanging over their relationship. I kept the house and most of our joint investments, while Tom took his retirement accounts and personal belongings. Since we had kept our finances largely separate throughout our marriage and had no children, the property division was relatively straightforward. The emotional impact of the divorce was more complex than I had anticipated. While I felt relieved to be free from a marriage that had become hollow and deceptive, I also grieved for the future I had imagined we would build together. 10 years of shared experiences and mutual support couldn't be erased overnight, even when the foundation of trust had been completely shattered. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, using the expansion of my healthcare investment portfolio as a way to channel my emotions into productive activity. Within 6 months of the divorce, Harper Healthcare Ventures had acquired 3 additional medical practices and was in negotiations to purchase a small hospital system in Colorado Springs. The success of my business provided a sense of accomplishment and purpose that helped fill the void left by the end of my marriage. I discovered that I actually preferred making decisions independently, without having to consider how they might affect a spouse who had never fully supported my ambitions anyway. 1 year after the anniversary party, I received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Stone. She had successfully established a new dental practice in Boulder and wanted to discuss the possibility of rejoining our healthcare network under new terms and conditions. Harper, I know this is probably the last call you expected to receive, but I wanted to reach out because I've learned a lot over the past year about professional boundaries and the importance of maintaining ethical standards in healthcare relationships. I listened politely as she explained how the experience of losing her previous practice had forced her to reevaluate her priorities and develop better systems for maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. She acknowledged that her relationship with Tom had been inappropriate and apologized for the disruption it had caused to our network. I understand if you never want to work with me again, she concluded, but I wanted you to know that I've grown from this experience and I'm committed to being the kind of professional that patients and healthcare networks can trust completely. Her call raised interesting questions about redemption and second chances in professional settings. Dr. Stone seemed genuinely remorseful and had apparently taken concrete steps to address the issues that had led to her termination. Should past mistakes permanently disqualify someone from future opportunities, or was there room for growth and rehabilitation? After careful consideration, I decided to invite Dr. Stone to submit a formal application for network participation, with the understanding that she would be subject to enhanced monitoring and oversight for a probationary period. If she could demonstrate sustained professional excellence and ethical behavior, she might eventually be considered for full network membership again. This decision felt like the right balance between accountability and compassion. Dr. Stone would have the opportunity to rebuild her reputation and prove that she had learned from her mistakes, while our network would maintain the high standards that protected our patients and providers. The conversation with Dr. Stone also provided an unexpected sense of closure to the entire situation. Her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and take responsibility for the consequences suggested that the difficult lessons of the past year had been meaningful for everyone involved, not just for me. As I reflected on everything that had transpired since that devastating anniversary party, I realized that the experience had fundamentally changed my understanding of strength, resilience, and professional integrity. I had discovered that it was possible to respond to betrayal and humiliation with dignity and strategic thinking, rather than emotional reactivity. The woman who had planned that anniversary celebration had been naive about human nature and overly trusting in the permanence of personal relationships. The woman who had walked out of that hotel ballroom had been transformed by the recognition that true security came from personal competence and professional achievement, rather than from depending on others to maintain their commitment. This transformation had been painful but ultimately liberating. I was no longer waiting for someone else to validate my worth or define my future. I was creating my own path forward, guided by my own values and ambitions, accountable only to myself and the people who depended on my professional judgment. The anniversary party that was supposed to celebrate 10 years of marriage had instead marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one defined by independence, professional success, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal with grace and strength and talent. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting in the conference room of Morrison & Associates, the most prestigious law firm in downtown Denver. Across from me sat 3 attorneys representing Tom and Rachel Stone, who had apparently decided to coordinate their legal strategies in an attempt to challenge my business decisions through the courts. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tom was now working with his mistress to fight the very woman whose success had funded his comfortable lifestyle for over a decade. "Miss Harper," began James Morrison, the senior partner who had built his reputation defending wealthy clients in complex litigation, "my clients believe that your actions regarding Dr. Stone's practice termination constitute an abuse of your corporate position and potentially criminal interference with business relationships. They're prepared to pursue both civil and criminal remedies unless we can reach an amicable resolution." I studied Morrison's face carefully, noting the practiced confidence of a lawyer who was accustomed to intimidating opponents into settlement. What he didn't understand was that I had been dealing with similar tactics from business adversaries for years, and I had learned not to be impressed by expensive suits and veiled threats. "Morrison, I appreciate your client's concerns, but I'm afraid they've fundamentally misunderstood both the legal framework governing healthcare networks and the factual basis for Dr. Stone's termination. Perhaps you could explain specifically which laws you believe I've violated, because my legal team has reviewed this matter extensively and found no basis for either civil or criminal liability." Morrison glanced at his notes, clearly not expecting such a direct challenge to his opening gambit. Most people facing the prospect of criminal charges would immediately begin negotiating, but I had spent too many years in boardrooms to be rattled by legal posturing. "The interference with business relationships is clear," he continued, though with less certainty than he had displayed initially. "You terminated Dr. Stone's agreements solely because of her personal relationship with your husband, not for any legitimate business reason. That constitutes tortious interference with her economic interests." I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. Morrison's legal theory was exactly what my attorneys had predicted opposing counsel would argue, and we had prepared a comprehensive response that would expose the weaknesses in their position. "Morrison, are you familiar with the professional conduct standards that govern healthcare providers in Colorado? Specifically, are you aware of the regulations regarding boundary violations and conflicts of interest in provider-patient relationships?" The slight shift in Morrison's expression told me that he wasn't as well versed in healthcare law as he had hoped to appear. This was a common problem with general practice attorneys who took on specialized cases without fully understanding the regulatory environment. "Stone's relationship with my husband violated clearly established professional boundaries that are outlined in both our network agreements and state regulatory guidelines. When a healthcare provider becomes romantically involved with a patient's family member, it creates a conflict of interest that compromises their ability to provide objective professional care." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder containing copies of the relevant regulations, professional conduct standards, and network agreement provisions that supported my position. These documents establish that Dr. Stone's termination was based on legitimate professional misconduct, not personal animus. The fact that I happen to be married to the patient involved doesn't change the underlying ethical violation or my authority as the network owner to enforce professional standards. Morrison spent several minutes reviewing the documents I had provided, and I could see his confidence diminishing as he realized that his client's legal position was far weaker than they had initially believed. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently beginning to understand that his attempt to use the legal system to pressure me was backfiring. Even if we accept your interpretation of the professional conduct standards, Morrison said finally, the timing and manner of Stone's termination suggest that personal motivations played a significant role in your decision-making process. A reasonable jury could conclude that you were acting out of spite rather than professional necessity. This was the argument I had been expecting, and it was the one that required the most careful response. The challenge was demonstrating that my decision-making process had been driven by legitimate business considerations rather than personal emotions, even though the two were inevitably intertwined given the circumstances. Mr. Morrison, business decisions are never made in a vacuum, and personal knowledge of relevant facts doesn't invalidate those decisions if they're based on sound professional judgment. I became aware of Stone's boundary violation through my personal relationship with the patient involved, but my response was dictated by the same professional standards I would apply to any provider in our network who engaged in similar misconduct. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Denver, collecting my thoughts before delivering the argument that I hoped would end this legal challenge once and for all. Let me ask you this: if Dr. Stone had been romantically involved with a different patient's husband, and I had learned about it through our normal monitoring processes, would you consider it inappropriate for me to terminate her agreement? Would you argue that I should ignore professional misconduct simply because it doesn't personally affect me? Morrison was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling to find a response that wouldn't undermine his client's position. The logic of my argument was inescapable: either professional standards applied consistently to all providers, or they were meaningless guidelines that could be ignored when convenient. The difference, Tom interjected suddenly, is that you wouldn't have reacted so quickly or decisively if it had been someone else's husband. You terminated Rachel's agreements within hours of discovering our relationship, without any investigation or due process. I turned to face Tom directly, feeling a mix of sadness and anger at his continued inability to understand the broader implications of his actions. Even now, facing the consequences of his choices, he seemed to believe that I should have responded with less professionalism rather than more. Tom, the speed of my response reflected the seriousness of the violation, not personal vindictiveness. When a healthcare provider crosses professional boundaries, immediate action is necessary to protect both patients and the integrity of the network. Allowing Dr. Stone to continue practicing while we conducted a lengthy investigation would have exposed us to additional liability and potentially compromised patient care. The meeting continued for another hour, but it became increasingly clear that Morrison's clients had no viable legal strategy. The documentation I had provided demonstrated conclusively that Dr. Stone's termination was based on legitimate professional misconduct, and the regulatory framework gave network administrators broad discretion in making such decisions. As the meeting concluded, Morrison made one final attempt to negotiate a settlement that would allow Dr. Stone to rejoin the network or receive financial compensation for her lost income. Ms. Harper, regardless of the legal merits, litigation is expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. My clients are willing to accept a monetary settlement that acknowledges the financial impact of Dr. Stone's termination while allowing everyone to move forward without further conflict. I gathered my papers and stood to leave, signaling that the meeting was over. Ms. Morrison, I'm not interested in paying anyone to resolve a legal challenge that has no merit. If your clients want to pursue litigation, they're welcome to do so, but they should understand that we'll defend our actions vigorously and seek sanctions if their claims prove to be frivolous. Walking out of that conference room, I felt a profound sense of validation. The legal challenge had forced me to articulate and defend my decision-making process in detail, and the exercise had confirmed that my actions had been both legally sound and professionally appropriate. Tom and Dr. Stone's attempt to use the courts to pressure me had failed completely, and they now faced the prospect of expensive litigation with little chance of success. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Morrison informing me that his clients had decided not to pursue legal action. The combination of weak legal grounds and my willingness to fight vigorously had convinced them that litigation would be both expensive and futile. Ms. Harper, my clients have decided to focus their energy on moving forward with their lives rather than relitigating past events. Dr. Stone is establishing a new practice in Boulder, and Mr. Harper is exploring new career opportunities. They wanted me to convey their hope that everyone can put this matter behind them and move on constructively. I thanked Morrison for the call and noted that I had no objection to Tom and Stone rebuilding their lives, as long as they did so without interfering with my business operations or making false claims about my professional conduct. The resolution of the legal challenge marked a turning point in my recovery from the betrayal and public humiliation I had experienced. I had faced down not only the emotional trauma of discovering my husband's affair, but also a coordinated attempt to use the legal system to undermine my professional reputation and business success. During this same period, Harper Healthcare Ventures was experiencing unprecedented growth. Word of how I had handled the Dr. Stone situation had spread throughout Denver's business community, and many people interpreted my actions as evidence of strong leadership and principled decision-making rather than vindictive behavior. Several prominent healthcare investors reached out to discuss potential partnerships, impressed by my willingness to enforce professional standards even when doing so created personal complications. One investor, Margaret Chen from San Francisco, flew to Denver specifically to meet with me about expanding my network into California markets. "Lisa, what happened with Dr. Stone could have destroyed a less experienced entrepreneur," Margaret explained during our lunch meeting at the Brown Palace Hotel. "The fact that you maintained your professional standards while dealing with such a personally devastating situation demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment and integrity that makes for successful long-term partnership." Margaret's perspective helped me understand that my handling of the crisis had actually enhanced my professional reputation rather than damaging it. Business leaders valued consistency and principled decision-making, even when those qualities were tested under extreme personal pressure. Over the following months, I signed partnership agreements that expanded Harper Healthcare Ventures into 3 new states and doubled our portfolio of managed practices. The success vindicated my belief that maintaining high professional standards would ultimately benefit both my business and the patients we serve. The expansion also required me to develop new systems for monitoring provider conduct and ensuring consistent application of professional standards across a much larger network. I hired additional compliance staff and implemented enhanced training programs to help providers understand and maintain appropriate professional boundaries. These improvements were directly inspired by the Dr. Stone situation, which had highlighted gaps in our previous monitoring system. If I had been more systematically tracking provider-patient interactions and potential conflicts of interest, I might have discovered the boundary violation before it escalated into a full romantic relationship. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tom's affair had ultimately led to improvements in my business operations that benefited thousands of patients and hundreds of healthcare providers. What had initially seemed like a purely destructive betrayal had catalyzed positive changes that extended far beyond the immediate participant. 8 months after the legal challenge was resolved, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at the Colorado Healthcare Leadership Conference about best practices in network management and professional standards enforcement. The conference organizers specifically requested that I address how healthcare administrators should handle boundary violations and conflicts of interest among network providers. Preparing for this presentation forced me to reflect more deeply on the lessons learned from the Dr. Stone situation and how those lessons could be applied more broadly within the healthcare industry. I realized that my experience, while personally painful, had provided valuable insights into the challenges of maintaining professional standards in complex business relationships. The presentation was well received, and several attendees approached me afterward to share their own experiences with similar challenges. Many healthcare administrators had faced situations where personal relationships complicated professional decision-making, but few had been willing to take decisive action when doing so might create legal or public relations challenges. You've given a lot of us courage to enforce standards that we knew were important but were afraid to defend, said Dr. Patricia Williams, who managed a large medical group in Colorado Springs. Your willingness to accept personal criticism in order to maintain professional integrity sets an example that the whole industry needs to follow. These conversations reinforced my conviction that I had made the right decisions, even though they had been difficult and controversial. Healthcare professionals had a responsibility to maintain public trust through consistent adherence to ethical standards, and that responsibility sometimes required making unpopular decisions. 6 months later, the Colorado Medical Board recognized Harper Healthcare Ventures with an award for excellence in professional standards enforcement and patient protection. The award ceremony was attended by hundreds of healthcare professionals and industry leaders, providing formal recognition that my approach to network management was both effective and appropriate. Standing at the podium to accept the award, I thought about how different my life had become since that devastating anniversary party. The woman who had planned that celebration had been focused on maintaining appearances and preserving a marriage that was already fundamentally broken.
The woman accepting this award had discovered her own strength and built something meaningful that extended far beyond personal relationships. The award also provided an opportunity to publicly acknowledge the growth and learning that had emerged from such a difficult experience. In my acceptance speech, I spoke about the importance of turning personal challenges into opportunities for professional development and positive change. Sometimes our greatest failures become our most valuable teachers, I told the audience. The challenge is finding the courage to learn from those experiences, rather than simply trying to forget them or pretend they never happened. After the ceremony, I was approached by several young women who were building their own healthcare businesses or pursuing leadership roles in the industry. They wanted advice about handling situations where personal and professional responsibilities conflicted, and how to maintain integrity when doing so might create immediate difficulties. These conversations reminded me that my experience had implications beyond my own business success. By demonstrating that it was possible to maintain professional standards even under extreme personal pressure, I had hopefully made it easier for other women to make similar choices when they faced comparable challenges. The recognition and expanded business opportunities were gratifying, but the most meaningful outcome of the entire experience was the personal growth and self-knowledge I had gained. I had discovered reserves of strength and resilience that I hadn't known existed, and I had learned to value my own judgment and integrity over external approval or validation. The marriage I had lost had been built on compromises and accommodations that ultimately undermined both my personal happiness and professional effectiveness. The life I was building as a single woman was grounded in principles and values that I could defend publicly and feel proud of privately. 2 years after the anniversary party confrontation, I received a letter from Dr. Stone that surprised me with its depth and thoughtfulness. She had successfully established her new practice in Boulder and wanted to share what she had learned from our conflict and its aftermath. Ms. Harper, I know you have no reason to care about my perspective on what happened between us, but I wanted you to know that the experience forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own professional conduct and personal integrity. Losing my practice was devastating at the time, but it ultimately led to important growth that has made me a better dentist and a better person. The letter went on to describe how Stone had used the crisis as an opportunity to seek professional development training in ethics and boundary maintenance, and how she had implemented new systems in her practice to prevent similar situations from arising in the future. I realize now that my relationship with Tom was not just a personal mistake, but a violation of the trust that patients place in healthcare providers. Your decision to terminate my network agreements was difficult to accept at the time, but I understand now that it was the appropriate response to serious professional misconduct. Reading her letter, I felt a complex mix of emotion. There was satisfaction in knowing that the consequences I had imposed had led to genuine learning and improvement rather than simply punishment and resentment. There was also a sense of validation that my judgment about the seriousness of the boundary violation had been correct. But most importantly, there was relief that the entire experience had ultimately contributed to positive outcomes for everyone involved, even if those outcomes had required significant short-term pain and disruption.
Dr. Stone's letter also included a request that surprised me. She asked if I would be willing to serve as a reference for her application to rejoin professional associations and specialty groups from which she had been suspended following the network termination. I understand if you prefer not to be involved in my professional rehabilitation, but I believe that your perspective on my growth and learning would carry significant weight with regulatory bodies and professional organizations. I would be grateful for any support you might be willing to provide. After careful consideration, I decided to provide a qualified reference that acknowledged both the seriousness of her original misconduct and the evidence of genuine learning and improvement she had demonstrated since then. It seemed important to balance accountability with redemption, and to support positive change when it appeared to be authentic and sustained. The reference I provided led to Ms. Stone's readmission to several professional organizations and her eventual certification in specialized ethics training programs. These developments suggested that the broader healthcare community had accepted her rehabilitation and was willing to support her continued professional development. 3 years after the anniversary party, Tom reached out to request a meeting to discuss some unresolved financial matters related to our divorce settlement. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Denver that neither of us had frequented during our marriage. Tom looked older and more worn than I remembered, and there was a subdued quality to his demeanor that suggested he had been through some difficult experiences since our last conversation. He thanked me for agreeing to meet and acknowledged that our previous interactions had been contentious and unproductive. "Lisa, I know I handled our separation terribly, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about the mistakes I made and the pain I caused. I wanted to apologize not just for the affair, but for the way I refused to understand your perspective and tried to use the legal system to pressure you into changing your business decision." His apology seemed genuine, and I appreciated the recognition that his behavior had extended beyond the initial betrayal to include subsequent attempts to undermine my professional judgment and business operation. "Tom, I accept your apology, and I hope you've found some peace and happiness in your new life. What happened between us was painful for everyone involved, but I believe we've all learned important lessons about integrity, accountability, and the importance of making choices that align with our values." The conversation that followed was more constructive than any we had shared since the discovery of his affair. Tom had apparently gone through his own process of reflection and growth, aided by counseling and the sobering experience of facing the real-world consequences of his choice. He explained that his relationship with Dr. Stone had ended several months earlier, not because of external pressure, but because they had realized that a relationship built on betrayal and deception was unlikely to develop into something healthy and sustainable. We kept waiting for the excitement and passion to settle into something deeper and more stable, but it never happened. I think we were both attracted to the drama and secrecy of the affair, rather than to each other as people. When those elements were removed, there wasn't much left to build on. Tom's insight into the dynamics of his affair relationship was more sophisticated than I had expected, and it suggested that he had developed a better understanding of his own motivations and patterns of behavior. Our meeting concluded with an agreement to finalize the remaining financial details of our divorce settlement and a mutual commitment to maintain respectful but minimal contact going forward. We had both moved on to new chapters in our lives, and there was no benefit to maintaining connections that might complicate our individual growth and development. Walking back to my office after that meeting, I reflected on how much had changed since that anniversary party 3 years earlier. The woman who had planned that celebration had been dependent on external validation and committed to preserving appearances even when doing so required compromising her own values and judgment. The woman walking through downtown Denver that afternoon had built a successful business empire, earned recognition for professional excellence, and developed the confidence to make difficult decisions based on principle rather than convenience. The transformation had been painful but ultimately liberating, providing a foundation for continued growth and achievement that was independent of personal relationships or external approval. That evening, I sat on the deck of my new home in the foothills west of Denver, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The house was smaller than the one I had shared with Tom, but it was entirely mine, furnished according to my own tastes and filled with art and books that reflected my personal interests rather than compromised aesthetic choices. The solitude that had initially seemed daunting had become a source of strength and creativity. Without the constant need to consider someone else's preferences and opinions, I had discovered aspects of my own personality and interests that had been suppressed during my marriage. I had also developed deeper friendships with other successful women who shared my commitment to professional excellence and personal integrity. These relationships provided intellectual stimulation and emotional support that was more fulfilling than the superficial social connections I had maintained as part of a married couple. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I raised a glass of wine in a private toast to the journey I had traveled and the woman I had become. The anniversary party that was supposed to celebrate 10 years of marriage had instead marked the beginning of the most rewarding and authentic period of my life. The betrayal and humiliation I had experienced that evening had been devastating, but they had also been liberating. They had forced me to choose between maintaining comfortable illusions and facing difficult truths, and I had found the courage to choose truth even when doing so required accepting significant short-term pain and uncertainty. The business success, professional recognition, and personal growth that followed had validated that choice and demonstrated that authentic strength comes from alignment between values and actions, rather than from external circumstances or other people's approval. Most importantly, I had learned that resilience isn't about avoiding difficult experiences, but about finding ways to transform those experiences into opportunities for growth and positive change. The woman who had been humiliated at her anniversary party had discovered reserves of strength and determination that enabled her to build something far more meaningful than what she had lost. 5 years had passed since that fateful anniversary party, and I found myself standing in the boardroom of Harper Healthcare Ventures' new headquarters in downtown Denver, looking out at the city skyline that had become the backdrop for my remarkable transformation. The company had grown from a regional healthcare investment firm into a national powerhouse with operations in 12 states and a portfolio worth over $200 million. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the conference table where I was meeting with the leadership team to discuss our latest acquisition opportunity. We were considering the purchase of a struggling hospital system in Phoenix that would expand our footprint into Arizona and represent the largest single investment in our company's history. "The financial analysis looks solid," said Marcus Rodriguez, my chief financial officer, as he reviewed the projections on his tablet. "The Phoenix Metro Health System has excellent facilities and a strong medical staff, but they've been hampered by poor management and outdated operational system. With our network integration model, we could turn them profitable within 18 months. Jennifer Walsh, our director of operations, nodded in agreement. "I've completed site visits to all 4 hospitals in their system, and the potential is definitely there. The medical equipment is modern, the locations are strategically positioned throughout the metro area, and most importantly, the staff seems genuinely committed to providing quality patient care. They just need better leadership and more efficient administrative processes." As I listened to my team's analysis, I reflected on how different these conversations had become compared to the early days of my business. When I first started Harper Healthcare Ventures, I was primarily focused on small dental and medical practices that could be improved through relatively simple operational changes. Now we were discussing investments that could impact tens of thousands of patients and employ hundreds of healthcare professionals. The growth hadn't happened overnight. Each acquisition had taught us valuable lessons about healthcare management, regulatory compliance, and the complex dynamics of medical practice operation. We had developed sophisticated systems for evaluating potential investments, integrating new practices into our network, and maintaining consistent quality standards across all our facilities. "What concerns do we have about the regulatory environment in Arizona?" I asked, knowing that healthcare regulations varied significantly from state to state and could impact the profitability of any acquisition. Sarah Kim, our legal counsel, had anticipated this question and pulled up her research on her laptop. "Arizona's healthcare regulatory framework is actually quite favorable for our business model. The state has been actively encouraging healthcare consolidation and network development, as a way to improve patient access and reduce costs. We shouldn't encounter any unusual barriers to implementing our standard integration procedures. The discussion continued for another hour as we analyzed every aspect of the potential acquisition. This level of thorough preparation had become standard practice for our team, reflecting the lessons learned from earlier investments, where insufficient due diligence had led to unexpected complications. One of those early lessons had come from a medical practice acquisition in Utah, where we discovered after the purchase that the primary physician was planning to retire within 6 months, but hadn't disclosed this information during negotiation. The experience had taught us to investigate not just the financial and operational aspects of potential acquisitions, but also the personal and professional plans of key personnel. Another valuable lesson had emerged from our expansion into Nevada, where we learned that local medical communities could be resistant to outside management companies if the integration process wasn't handled with appropriate sensitivity to existing relationships and established practices. We had since developed comprehensive communication strategies for introducing our management approach in ways that emphasized collaboration and improvement, rather than replacement and disruption. As our meeting concluded, I felt the familiar satisfaction that came from working with a team of intelligent, dedicated professionals who shared my commitment to excellence in healthcare delivery. Building this organization had been one of the most rewarding aspects of my post-divorce life, providing both financial success and the deeper fulfillment that comes from meaningful work. The Phoenix acquisition would require a significant investment of both capital and management attention, but the potential returns were substantial enough to justify the risk. More importantly, successful integration of the hospital system would demonstrate our capability to manage large, complex healthcare operations and position us for even more ambitious projects in the future. That afternoon, I had lunch with Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, a prominent cardiologist who served on the board of several national medical organizations. Elizabeth had become both a close friend and valuable advisor over the past few years, providing insights into healthcare trends and industry developments that helped inform our strategic planning. Lisa, I have to say that watching your company's growth has been absolutely remarkable, Elizabeth said as we settled into our usual table at the Cherry Creek Country Club. When you first started talking about your vision for healthcare network management, I wasn't sure the industry was ready for that level of consolidation and standardization. But you've proven that it's possible to maintain quality care while achieving operational efficiency. Elizabeth's perspective was particularly valuable because she had initially been skeptical of my business model. As a practicing physician, she had been concerned that management companies might prioritize financial considerations over patient care quality. Her gradual recognition that our approach actually enhanced both efficiency and clinical outcomes had helped validate our strategy. The key has been understanding that healthcare professionals want to focus on patient care rather than administrative burdens, I explained. When we can handle the business operations effectively, doctors and nurses can concentrate on what they do best. Everyone benefits from that division of labor. Our conversation turned to broader trends in the healthcare industry, including the increasing pressure on medical practices to demonstrate measurable outcomes, and the growing importance of technology in patient care delivery. These developments created both challenges and opportunities for healthcare management companies like ours. There's talk in Washington about new legislation that would incentivize healthcare consolidation as a way to control costs and improve quality, Elizabeth mentioned. If those policies are implemented, companies like yours could see significant growth opportunities over the next decade. The prospect of federal support for our business model was encouraging, but I had learned to focus on building sustainable operations, rather than depending on policy changes that might or might not materialize. The success of Harper Healthcare Ventures was based on demonstrable improvements in patient care and operational efficiency, not on regulatory advantages or artificial market conditions. As we finished lunch, Elizabeth brought up a topic that she had mentioned several times over the past year. Lisa, I hope you'll consider applying for the Healthcare Leadership Excellence Award that the American Hospital Association sponsors annually. Your work in network development and quality improvement certainly merits that level of recognition. The suggestion was flattering, but I had mixed feelings about seeking high-profile industry awards. While recognition was gratifying, I was more interested in building long-term value than accumulating accolades that might create unrealistic expectations or unwanted attention. I appreciate the encouragement, Elizabeth, but I'd rather let our results speak for themselves. The real measure of success is whether we're improving patient outcomes and creating sustainable value for the communities we serve. Elizabeth smiled, recognizing my reluctance to seek publicity while also understanding the broader benefits that industry recognition could provide. Fair enough, but don't underestimate the value of setting an example for other entrepreneurs, especially women who are building healthcare businesses. Your success story could inspire others to pursue similar ventures. Her point about inspiring other women entrepreneurs resonated with me more than the prospect of personal recognition. Throughout my career, I had benefited from the examples set by successful businesswomen who had proven that gender didn't limit what was possible in traditionally male-dominated industries. That evening, I attended a networking event for Colorado healthcare executives, where I had the opportunity to speak with other business leaders about industry trends and challenges. These gatherings had become valuable sources of information and potential partnerships, helping me stay connected to the broader healthcare community. During the reception, I was approached by Dr. James Peterson, the CEO of Colorado Springs Medical Center, who wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities between our organizations. Ms. Harper, I've been following your company's growth with great interest, Dr. Peterson said. We're exploring partnerships with management companies that could help us improve our operational efficiency while maintaining our focus on clinical excellence. I'd love to schedule a more detailed conversation about how we might work together. These types of conversations had become increasingly common as word spread about our success in improving healthcare operations without compromising patient care quality. The reputation we had built was opening doors to opportunities that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. I'd be happy to discuss potential collaboration, Dr. Peterson. Why don't you have your team reach out to schedule a meeting where we can explore your specific needs and see if our capabilities align with your objectives? As the evening progressed, I found myself reflecting on how different these professional interactions had become compared to the early days of my business. There was a confidence and authority in my presence now that came from proven success and hard-earned expertise. People sought my opinion and valued my insights in ways that reflected genuine respect for my accomplishments. The contrast with my former life as Tom's wife was striking. During our marriage, my professional achievements had always been secondary to my role as a supportive spouse who helped maintain the social connections that he believed were important for his career advancement. Now my own reputation and relationships were the foundation for continued growth and success. 6 months later, I received a phone call that brought the story full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. The caller was Rachel Stone, whom I hadn't spoken with since receiving her letter several years earlier. Ms. Harper, I hope you'll forgive the unexpected call, but I wanted to reach out because I have a proposition that I think might interest you, she began, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised me. I was curious enough to listen, though I couldn't imagine what kind of proposition she might have in mind given our history. I've been following your company's expansion, and I'm deeply impressed by what you've accomplished. Over the past few years, I've been working to rebuild my practice and establish myself as a leader in dental ethics and professional conduct. I'm now in a position where I'd like to explore the possibility of joining your network again, but under very different circumstances than before. The irony of her request wasn't lost on me. The woman whose career I had effectively ended was now asking to become part of the business empire I had built since our confrontation. Rachel, I appreciate your call, and I'm genuinely pleased to hear that you've been successful in rebuilding your practice. However, I'm not sure I understand what you're proposing. Are you suggesting that we acquire your current practice, or are you looking for some other type of arrangement? Actually, I'm proposing something more significant than a simple practice acquisition. I've developed expertise in professional conduct training and ethics compliance that I believe could be valuable to your entire network. I'd like to discuss the possibility of joining Harper Healthcare Ventures as a director of professional standards, helping to develop and implement policies that prevent the kind of boundary violations that ended our previous relationship. Her proposal was audacious and unexpected, but it wasn't entirely without merit. Our network had grown large enough that we needed more sophisticated systems for monitoring professional conduct and ensuring consistent ethical standards across all our facilities. Having someone with Rachel's experience and specialized training could actually be beneficial, assuming she had genuinely learned from her mistakes and developed relevant expertise. That's an interesting proposition, Rachel. Obviously, given our history, any such arrangement would require extensive discussion and careful consideration of how it might work practically, but I'm willing to have a conversation about it if you're serious about pursuing this direction. We agreed to meet the following week at my office, where she could present her qualifications, and we could explore whether there might be a basis for working together despite our complicated path. The meeting took place on a crisp October morning, exactly 5 years after the anniversary party that had changed both our lives so dramatically. Rachel arrived precisely on time, dressed professionally, and carrying a portfolio of materials that demonstrated her development as an expert in healthcare ethics and professional conduct. Ms. Harper, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this must seem like an unusual request, but I believe I can make a meaningful contribution to your organization while also demonstrating that people can learn from their mistakes and become better professionals as a result. She spent the next hour presenting her credentials, including advanced certifications in healthcare ethics, published articles on professional boundary maintenance, and testimonials from colleagues who had worked with her on ethics training programs. The presentation was comprehensive and professional, demonstrating genuine expertise that could benefit our network. Rachel, I have to admit that your qualifications are impressive, and your proposal has merit from a business standpoint. However, we both know that hiring you would create challenges beyond the usual considerations for new senior staff members. How do you think we could address the perception issues that would inevitably arise? She had clearly anticipated this question and had prepared a thoughtful response. I believe the best way to address those concerns would be through complete transparency about our history and the lessons learned from it. Rather than trying to hide or minimize what happened, we could use it as a case study for the importance of maintaining professional standards and the possibility of rehabilitation when violations occur. Her suggestion was surprisingly sophisticated and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that I hadn't expected. Using our conflict as an educational tool could actually strengthen the credibility of our ethics programs, while demonstrating our commitment to both accountability and redemption. That's an interesting approach, Rachel. It would certainly be unconventional, but it might also be more effective than traditional ethics training that relies on hypothetical scenarios rather than real-world examples. We spent another hour discussing the practical details of how such an arrangement might work, including reporting relationships, compensation structure, and performance expectations. By the end of our meeting, I was genuinely intrigued by the possibility of turning our adversarial relationship into a collaborative partnership that could benefit our entire organization. Rachel, I'm going to need some time to think about this proposal and discuss it with my leadership team. It's not a decision I can make quickly, given the complexity of the situation and the potential implications for our company culture. I completely understand, Ms. Harper. This isn't a typical hiring decision, and it shouldn't be treated like one. I'm confident that if you decide to move forward, we can create something positive and meaningful from what started as a very difficult situation. After she left, I spent the rest of the afternoon reflecting on the remarkable turn of events. The woman who had been instrumental in ending my marriage was now asking to join the company I had built in the aftermath of that betrayal. The proposal forced me to consider whether I had truly moved beyond the anger and hurt of our original conflict, or whether residual emotions might compromise my judgment about what was best for my business. Over the following weeks, I discussed Rachel's proposal with my leadership team, seeking their perspectives on both the professional merits and the potential risks of such an unusual hiring decision. The conversations were fascinating, revealing different viewpoints on redemption, professional rehabilitation, and the relationship between personal history and business judgment. Marcus, my CFO, was initially skeptical about the wisdom of hiring someone with whom I had such a complicated personal history. Lisa, even if Dr. Stone is genuinely qualified for this role, don't you think the potential for conflict and distraction outweighs the benefit? There are other qualified candidates who wouldn't bring this kind of baggage to the position.
Jennifer, our director of operations, had a different perspective. Actually, I think there could be significant advantages to hiring someone who has experienced the consequences of professional misconduct firsthand.
Stone would bring a level of credibility to our ethics programs that we couldn't achieve with someone who had only theoretical knowledge of these issues. Sarah, our legal counsel, focused on the practical implications of the decision. From a legal standpoint, there's nothing preventing us from hiring Dr. Stone, assuming she's qualified for the position. The question is whether the potential benefits justify the complexity that would inevitably accompany such an arrangement. After careful consideration and extensive discussion with my team, I decided to offer Rachel the position of Director of Professional Standards, with the understanding that her effectiveness would be closely monitored and that the arrangement would include a detailed performance improvement plan. The decision felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with betrayal and humiliation, but had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more meaningful. By choosing to work with Rachel rather than maintaining our adversarial relationship, I was demonstrating that business decisions could be based on merit and potential value rather than personal history and emotional reactions. Rachel's first year with Harper Healthcare Ventures exceeded all expectations. Her ethics training programs became a model for the industry, combining theoretical knowledge with real-world case studies that resonated with healthcare professionals throughout our network. The transparency about our own history added credibility to the training that made it unusually effective in preventing boundary violations and professional misconduct. More importantly, our collaboration demonstrated that people could learn from serious mistakes and become more valuable as a result of those experiences. Rachel's transformation from someone who had violated professional boundaries to someone who helped others maintain them became a powerful example of the possibility for growth and redemption in professional setting. 2 years after Rachel joined the company, Harper Healthcare Ventures was recognized by the American Medical Association as the national leader in professional ethics training and compliance program. The award ceremony was held in Chicago, and I was invited to deliver the keynote address about innovative approaches to maintaining professional standards in healthcare organizations. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of hundreds of healthcare leaders, I reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought me to this moment. The anniversary party that had seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of something far more significant than I could have imagined. Excellence in healthcare requires more than clinical expertise and operational efficiency, I told the audience. It requires a commitment to ethical conduct that is maintained even when doing so is difficult or costly. The organizations that succeed in the long term are those that treat professional standards not as constraints on success, but as foundations for sustainable achievement. After my speech, I was approached by dozens of healthcare executives who wanted to learn more about our approach to ethics training and professional development. Many of them expressed amazement that we had been able to turn a professional misconduct incident into a competitive advantage for our organization. That evening, at the awards dinner, I found myself seated next to Patricia Williams, the president of the American Medical Association, who had been following our company's development for several years. "Lisa, what you've accomplished with Harper Healthcare Ventures is truly remarkable," she said during our conversation. "But what impresses me most is how you've demonstrated that business success and ethical excellence are not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing. That's a lesson the entire healthcare industry needs to embrace." As the evening progressed, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that went beyond financial success or professional recognition. I had built something meaningful that made a positive difference in the lives of patients, healthcare professionals, and communities throughout the country. The journey from that devastating anniversary party to this moment of industry recognition had been longer and more complex than I could have anticipated. It had required not just business acumen and professional expertise, but also the emotional resilience to transform betrayal into opportunity and the wisdom to choose growth over vengeance. Most importantly, it had taught me that authentic success comes not from avoiding difficult experiences, but from finding ways to extract value and meaning from those experiences. The woman who had been humiliated in front of her friends and family had discovered that her greatest strength lay not in maintaining perfect appearances, but in responding to imperfection with intelligence, integrity, and determination. As I returned to Denver the following day, I looked forward to continuing the work of building an organization that demonstrated the possibility of combining business excellence with ethical leadership. The company that had emerged from the ashes of my marriage had become something larger and more important than I had ever imagined, providing a platform for positive change that extended far beyond my personal recovery and success. The story that had begun with betrayal and ended with triumph was ultimately about the power of principled decision-making and the possibility of transformation that exists even in the most challenging circumstances. It was a story I was proud to have lived and grateful to continue writing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.